Jack Cooper was having what he'd generously call a suboptimal day. He'd seen better days, sure, like yesterday when the station still had a full complement of alien staff, and he wasn't watching the last evacuation pod disappear into the vast emptiness of space. But today? Today was definitely ranking in his personal top 10 of days that really could have gone better. Standing at the observation window of Outpost Delta-9, Jack took a long sip from his coffee mug, which proudly displayed the text "Humans solving problems that shouldn't exist in the first place." The bitter liquid had gone cold hours ago, right around the time the station's primary heating system had decided to take an unscheduled vacation. He watched as the final escape pod's thrusters flared one last time before the vessel vanished into the darkness, carrying away the last of his alien coworkers. Well, he muttered to himself, at least they left a note. The note in question was still floating on his personal tablet, its cheerful blue text somehow managing to convey both diplomatic politeness and complete indifference to his continued existence. Immediate evacuation notice due to an approaching diplomatic incident of classification level purple defined in subsection 7249B of the Galactic Cooperation Treaty as "Oh dear, this is rather awkward. All non-essential personnel are required to evacuate Outpost Delta-9 immediately. Essential personnel will be notified separately regarding their evacuation schedule. P.S. This notice constitutes your official separation from employment. Please ensure all personal belongings are removed within the next 10 standard minutes." Jack looked around at the empty station, then back at his tablet. "I'm starting to suspect I might not have been classified as essential personnel." The station's overhead lights flickered ominously, as if to agree with his assessment. He'd been the only human on Delta-9 for the past 3 standard years, hired as part of what the Galactic Council had called their diversity initiative. In reality, it had been more of a "we need someone who can fix things without filing 17 forms and triplicate" initiative. The aliens had quickly discovered that humans had an uncanny knack for keeping machinery running long past its expected lifespan, even if their methods were considered somewhat unorthodox by galactic standards. The station's computer chose that moment to crackle to life, its usually smooth artificial voice now sounding distinctly glitchy. "Attention. Primary life support systems are now operating at 47% efficiency. Secondary systems are..." Wait, do we even have secondary systems? Oh dear, that's not good. Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. "PETA, status report. And please try to be less dramatic about it this time." PETA, the partially intelligent technical assistant, had been Jack's constant companion since his arrival on the station. The AI had originally been named something far more dignified in the alien language, but after the 3rd time it had lectured Jack about proper maintenance procedures, while he was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning waste recycling unit, he'd renamed it. The name had stuck, much to the AI's ongoing dismay. "Dramatic? Me? I would never," PETA responded, managing to sound both offended and worried simultaneously. "But since you asked so nicely, here's our current situation. Primary power core is running at 38% capacity and dropping. Life support is, as mentioned, having what you humans would call a moment. Environmental controls are functional but, shall we say, creative in their interpretation of comfortable temperature ranges. Oh, and the coffee maker in Section C has finally given up the ghost." "Not the coffee maker," Jack groaned. "That's the only one that could make a decent espresso." "Truly, this is the greatest of our concerns right now," PETA deadpanned. "Not the fact that we're floating in space with rapidly degrading life support. No, definitely the coffee maker." Jack started walking toward the engineering bay, his boots echoing in the now empty corridors. "Hey, proper caffeine intake is crucial for human problem-solving capabilities. And something tells me we're going to need a lot of problem-solving in the near future." He paused at a junction, looking at the various warning lights that had begun to illuminate the corridor. Red, amber, purple, and one particularly concerning shade of mauve that he'd never seen before. The station was falling apart, and he was the only one left to fix it. "PETA, how long until the nearest potential rescue?" The AI was silent for a moment, presumably calculating, based on standard emergency protocols and the current political situation. "Approximately never. The diplomatic incident they mentioned? It's essentially turned this entire sector into a no-fly zone. We're in the equivalent of a galactic DMZ." "Perfect," Jack said, finally allowing himself a grim smile. "That means no one can stop me from fixing this place my way." "Oh no," PETA said, genuine alarm creeping into its voice. "You're going to use duct tape again, aren't you?" "PETA, my dear AI friend," Jack replied, already reaching for his toolbox. Duct tape is going to be the least of your concerns. We're about to get creative. The lights flickered again, and somewhere in the distance, a pipe burst with a sound that suggested it had been waiting years for this moment. Jack looked down at his now empty coffee mug and sighed. But first, we need to fix that coffee maker. The coffee maker, as it turned out, wasn't just broken, it had been actively sabotaged. Jack stared at the mangled remains of what had once been the station's finest piece of equipment, trying to process the betrayal. Someone took a plasma cutter to this, he said, holding up what remained of the brewing mechanism. Who takes a plasma cutter to a coffee maker? If I had to guess, PETA chimed in, probably Station Administrator Koraxt. He never did approve of your caffeine consumption levels, called it disturbing to watch and possibly toxic. Jack carefully set down the destroyed components. Koraxt, the same Koraxt who insisted on filling out risk assessment forms in triplicate every time I used a screwdriver. The very same. Well, Jack said, pulling out his tablet, time to send a strongly worded message to Station Command about this flagrant violation of Section 47B of the Human Rights and Accommodations Act. Jack, PETA said slowly, as if explaining something to a particularly dense child. The communication array is down, has been for the last hour. Also, there is no Section 47B of the Human Rights and Accommodations Act. There isn't. No. You made that up last month to justify installing a hot tub in the zero-gravity recreation area. Jack grinned. And it worked, didn't it? Best installation I ever did. Speaking of communications, though, how bad is it? PETA's avatar on a nearby screen shifted to what Jack had come to recognize as its delivering bad news configuration, a slightly dimmer version of its usual pulsing blue light. Well, let's see. Long-range communications are completely offline. Short-range communications are technically working, but since we're in a diplomatic exclusion zone, broadcasting anything would be about as useful as trying to teach quantum physics to a potato. Hey now, Jack interrupted, potatoes are surprisingly versatile. Did I ever tell you about the time I used one to replace a burnt-out power coupling? Yes, 17 times. The fact that it worked still disturbs me deeply. PETA's avatar flickered. But back to our current crisis, we have approximately 72 hours before the primary power core fails completely. Without main power, life support will switch to emergency backup, which will last another 48 hours at most. After that, things get interesting, Jack finished, already pulling tools from his belt. All right, give me a full system diagnostic. Every fault, every failing component, every system that's even thinking about breaking down. I want to know exactly how much duct tape we're going to need. You can't possibly be serious about using adhesive strips too. PETA, Jack interrupted. What's the first rule of human engineering? The AI sighed, a sound it had perfectly mimicked from Jack's own expressions of exasperation. If it's stupid, but it works. It's not stupid, Jack finished with a flourish, pulling out a roll of silver tape that gleamed under the flickering lights. Now, about that diagnostic. What followed was possibly the most comprehensive list of mechanical failures ever documented in Galactic Council space. Critical systems were failing faster than a politician's promises during election season. Backup systems were failing even faster, apparently having taken offense at being called backup in the first place. Even the systems designed to monitor failing systems were failing, which Jack had to admit showed a certain commitment to thoroughness. And finally, PETA concluded after 20 minutes of increasingly concerning status reports, the artificial gravity in Section F is, well, it's not so much artificial gravity anymore as it is artificial suggestion of gravity. I'd avoid that area, unless you're feeling particularly adventurous. Jack had been taking notes throughout the entire report, his tablet now filled with what looked like the world's most depressing shopping list. Okay, so if we prioritize the critical systems. He was interrupted by a loud bang from somewhere deep within the station, followed by the distinct sound of rushing air. What was that, he asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Remember how I mentioned the primary coolant system was showing signs of stress? PETA replied. It appears it just decided to retire early, without leaving notice, or taking its containment protocols with it. Jack was already running toward the source of the sound, tool belt jingling like some sort of deranged Christmas elf. Any chance it's just a small leak? Just define small. Another bang echoed through the corridors, this one accompanied by a spray of green coolant that painted the ceiling in what would have been a lovely abstract pattern under any other circumstances. Never mind, Jack said, picking up his pace. New question, what's the worst that could happen if we rerouted the auxiliary fluid lines through the thermal regulation bypass? There was a pause as PETA processed this suggestion. That would be incredibly dangerous, highly unstable, and completely against at least 15 different safety protocols. But would it work? Well, theoretically, yes. But Jack, the pressure differentials alone would. Perfect, Jack interrupted, reaching the maintenance access panel and beginning to remove it. Time to get creative. And PETA? Start a new list titled Things We're Never Telling the Safety Inspector. I've had that list running since the day you arrived, PETA replied dryly. It's currently 847 pages long. Jack paused his work just long enough to look proud. Only 847? We must be slipping. Let's see if we can't bump those numbers up a bit today. As he dove into the maze of pipes and wiring, Jack couldn't help but smile. Sure, he was trapped on a failing space station with no hope of rescue, racing against time to prevent multiple catastrophic system failures. But at least he finally had free rein to fix things his way. Hey PETA, he called out, his voice echoing from inside the maintenance shaft. What's the galactic safety rating for using food replicator parts to patch a coolant system? The AI's response was immediate and horrified. There isn't one, because no one has ever been crazy enough to try it. Excellent, Jack replied. Then we're about to make history. This is either going to work perfectly or blow up spectacularly, Jack announced, stepping back to admire his handiwork. The coolant system now resembled something between a modern art installation and a plumber's fever dream. Pipes that were never meant to connect had been joined with a combination of modified food replicator parts, emergency sealant, and yes, a liberal amount of duct tape. Those aren't mutually exclusive outcomes, PETA pointed out. In fact, with your methods, they frequently occur simultaneously. Jack wiped his hands on his already stained jumpsuit. Have a little faith. When have my repairs ever completely failed? Would you like that list chronologically or alphabetically? I said completely failed, Jack corrected. Sure, there have been a few. Unexpected outcomes, but they always work in the end. Like the time you fixed the waste recycling system. Hey, it's still running, isn't it? It's running at 146% efficiency and occasionally produces small diamonds. Jack beamed. Exactly. That's what we in the engineering business call a feature, not a bug. Now let's fire this baby up and see what happens. The new coolant system hummed to life, producing a sound that somehow managed to convey both operational success and deep mechanical concern. Green liquid began flowing through the makeshift network of pipes, occasionally taking creative detours but ultimately reaching its intended destinations. Primary coolant flow restored, PETA reported, sounding surprised despite itself. Temperature levels are actually stabilizing, though I'm detecting some unusual energy readings from the modified replicator components. Unusual how? As if in answer, one of the pipes began to glow with a soft blue light, casting ethereal patterns on the walls. Ha, Jack said, tilting his head. That's new. Should I add accidentally created bioluminescent coolant to the list of things we're never telling the safety inspector? Definitely. Also, make a note that it looks pretty cool. We might want to replicate that effect elsewhere. Jack was already moving on to his next target. Now, about that power core situation. The station's primary power core was housed in a chamber that the original designers had made deliberately difficult to access, operating under the theory that anything requiring that much security probably shouldn't be tinkered with. They hadn't counted on human determination, nor on Jack's willingness to crawl through maintenance shafts that even the repair drones deemed too narrow. You know, Jack grunted, squeezing through a particularly tight section of ventilation duct. I'm starting to think this station wasn't designed with human maintenance in mind. What gave it away? The 3-meter-high control panels or the fact that half the warning labels are in frequencies humans can't perceive? I mean, the warning labels thing explains a lot about my first month here. Jack finally emerged into the power core chamber, immediately taking in the sight before him. Oh wow, that's not great. The power core, normally a sleek cylinder of contained plasma and precise engineering, was now flickering like a faulty neon sign. The protective housing had developed several cracks, and the monitoring systems were displaying readings in what appeared to be interpretative dance rather than actual numbers. Current power output is at 31% and dropping, PETA reported. The containment field is degrading, the plasma injection system is misaligned, and Did you just pull out a rubber band? It's not just any rubber band, Jack replied defensively, stretching the thick band between his hands. This is military-grade elastic composite, rated for extreme temperatures and pressure differentials. And you just happen to carry that with you. Rule 17 of human engineering: always be prepared for improvised solutions. Jack was already climbing up to the power core's main access panel. Besides, you'd be amazed what you can do with the right rubber band and a positive attitude. What followed was perhaps the most creative hour of engineering in galactic history. Jack attacked the power core's problems with a combination of technical expertise, desperate innovation, and what PETA could only describe as mechanical heresy. The rubber band found its purpose reinforcing a failing containment coupling. A spare datapad was repurposed as a power flow regulator. And in a move that would have given any traditional engineer a heart attack, Jack managed to boost the core's efficiency by introducing a controlled feedback loop that technically shouldn't have been possible. Power output now at 87%, and holding steady, PETA announced, its tone somewhere between impressed and disturbed, though I feel compelled to point out that the core is now humming in what appears to be perfect C minor. See? That's how you know it's happy. Jack patted the core's housing affectionately. A little music never hurt anyone. Now what's next on our crisis list? The artificial gravity in Section F is still. A distant crash interrupted PETA's report, followed by the distinctive sound of unsecured objects deciding to explore new directions in space. Right, Jack said, already heading for the exit. Section F it is. Quick question: how do you feel about using the station's old entertainment system as a gravity field modulator? PETA's silence was eloquent in its horror. I'll take that as enthusiastic approval, Jack grinned, ducking back into the maintenance shaft. Trust me, this is going to be great. Probably. As he crawled back through the station's arteries, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sure, his methods might be unorthodox, and yes, he might be breaking every engineering regulation in the book. But sometimes the best solutions were the ones that no one else would dare to try. Besides, he thought as he emerged into a corridor where gravity was currently more of a suggestion than a law, what was the worst that could happen? Jack PETA's voice carried a note of warning. I really wish you hadn't thought that. Why? The entertainment system, which Jack had been planning to repurpose, chose that moment to power up spontaneously, filling the section with holographic advertisements for luxury space cruises, all playing upside down and in reverse. Because, PETA replied, the universe tends to take questions like that as a personal challenge. Jack watched as a holographic space whale floated past, somehow managing to swim through solid walls. Well, he said, pulling out his tools, at least it'll be interesting. The gravity situation in Section F had evolved from problematic to interpretative dance performance. Objects floated in patterns that seemed to actively mock the laws of physics, while the holographic space whale continued its leisurely swim through walls, occasionally accompanied by advertising jingles played in reverse. You know, Jack said, watching a chair slowly pirouette past his head, I think we might need to adjust our definition of working for this section. Oh? And what definition would you suggest? PETA asked, its avatar following the chair's movement with what could only be described as morbid fascination. Let's call it creatively functional. Jack ducked as a potted plant drifted by, its leaves swaying in a non-existent breeze. The gravity's not broken, it's just jazz. Jazz typically doesn't involve office furniture performing ballet. Clearly you've never been to the right jazz clubs. Jack reached out and snagged the floating chair, anchoring himself as he studied the entertainment system's central processor. Now, if we reroute the holographic projector's power through the gravity plating. What followed was a sequence of events that PETA would later classify as technically successful but aesthetically questionable. The entertainment system, when connected to the gravity controls, began generating a stable gravitational field, but it also insisted on projecting random advertisements as solid light holograms. Well, Jack said, standing firmly on the floor while a ghostly advertisement for Xenonian tooth polish walked through him, the gravity's fixed. At the cost of turning the entire section into an interactive commercial break. Think of it as ambient entertainment. Jack watched as the space whale, now properly oriented, merged with an advertisement for luxury vacuum cleaners to create what looked like a cosmic Roomba. Besides, some of these ads are pretty interesting. Did you know there's a resort planet that offers anti-gravity massages? Focus, Jack. We still have the life support system to deal with, and it's getting increasingly creative with its interpretation of breathable atmosphere. As if on cue, the air recyclers made a sound that suggested they were trying to yodel. Right, Jack said, already moving toward the life support control room. What's our status on that front? Primary atmospheric processors are operating at 23% efficiency. Backup systems are. Well, remember that yodeling sound? That's actually an improvement from 10 minutes ago when they were trying to beatbox. The life support control room looked like it had been decorated by someone with a passionate hatred for user interfaces. Displays covered every surface, each showing different atmospheric readings in various alien number systems. Pipes and conduits wound around the room like metallic vines, occasionally emitting puffs of what Jack really hoped was just steam. Okay, he said, cracking his knuckles. Time to get serious. Oh no. Oh yes. PETA. Remember that hydroponics experiment I was running? The one that violated 17 different biosafety protocols? That's the one. Well, it turns out those modified plants are really good at producing oxygen, and if we connect them to the main air recycling system. You want to turn the entire station's life support over to your illegal botany project. Jack was already pulling out tools. Not the entire station, just enough to supplement the failing systems. Plus, the plants seemed to really enjoy heavy metal music, which might help with that yodeling situation. What happened next would have made any conventional engineer resign on the spot. Jack essentially created a hybrid life support system that combined standard air recyclers with a network of genetically modified plants, all synchronized to the beat of classic rock music. The plants, apparently thriving on their new diet of metal riffs, began producing oxygen at rates that shouldn't have been possible. Atmospheric oxygen levels stabilizing, PETA reported, sounding both impressed and slightly concerned, though I feel compelled to point out that the ferns are headbanging. That means they're happy. Jack watched as a particularly enthusiastic vine started playing air guitar. And look, CO2 scrubbing is up 200%. The moss is forming mosh pits. Efficient mosh pits, Jack corrected. Every time they slam dance, they release extra oxygen. It's basic plant physics. Before PETA could point out that plant physics wasn't actually a recognized scientific discipline, a new alarm started blaring. This one had apparently decided that standard warning sounds were too mainstream, and had opted for a kazoo-like tone instead. What now? Jack asked, though his grin suggested he was enjoying the challenges more than he probably should. The power distribution grid is failing. And before you ask, no, we cannot fix it with more plants. Of course not, Jack said, already heading for the door. We're going to fix it with coffee makers. What? Think about it, coffee makers are basically just specialized power converters. If we network enough of them together and modify their heating elements. Jack. That's brilliant. I was going to say criminally insane, but I suppose those aren't mutually exclusive when it comes to your solutions. The next few hours involved what could only be described as a coffee maker revolution. Jack gathered every surviving coffee machine on the station, except for the one Carx had destroyed, which he took a moment to mourn properly and began converting them into a distributed power management system. Each machine was modified to handle power conversion and distribution, their heating elements repurposed as energy regulators. The result was a power grid that not only worked but occasionally produced fresh coffee as a byproduct. I can't believe this is actually functioning, PETA said, watching as the network of coffee makers hummed contentedly, perfectly synchronized with the headbanging ferns in the background. Though I do have one question. Just one. You're slipping. Why does the power grid smell like hazelnut? Jack took a sip from his newly brewed coffee, courtesy of the power distribution system. I had to use flavored coffee filters as makeshift power coupling insulators. Turns out they work better than the standard ones. Who knew? And the whipped cream dispenser that's now managing reactor temperature. Emergency pressure release valve. Very important safety feature. PETA's avatar flickered in what might have been a sigh. You know, when the station designers returns, they're going to have several questions about all this. Good, Jack said, patting a nearby coffee maker that was doubling as a power junction box. I have several questions for them too, starting with why they didn't include cup holders in the maintenance crawl spaces. The station hummed around them, its systems now running on a combination of modified plants, repurposed appliances, and what could only be described as engineered chaos. But it was working better than before. In fact, if you didn't mind the occasional burst of heavy metal music or the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the air recyclers. You realize, PETA said, That you've essentially turned this state-of-the-art space station into a coffee-powered greenhouse rock concert. Jack took another sip of his power grid brewed coffee. You say that like it's a bad thing. 3 weeks after what Jack had started calling the Great Space Divorce, he was conducting his morning inspection of the station's systems. This mainly involved walking around with a cup of power grid coffee, patting machinery encouragingly, and occasionally stopping to headbang with the more enthusiastic plants. Environmental systems are running at 127% efficiency, Peter reported, having long since given up questioning how that was mathematically possible. Power distribution is stable, though the grid is requesting more hazelnut filters. Make a note to start rationing those, Jack said, ducking under a low-hanging vine that was attempting to form a guitar solo. We can't have the power grid getting too fancy with its coffee preferences. That's when the proximity alerts started going off in perfect harmony with the heavy metal playing in the life support section. Well, Jack said, looking at the approaching ships on the monitor, this should be interesting. The vessels approaching the station bore the unmistakable markings of the Galactic Council's Engineering Oversight Committee, the same bureaucrats who had once spent 3 days debating the proper form color for recording routine maintenance. They're hailing us, PETA announced. Though I should warn you, their transmission is causing the coffee makers to produce espresso instead of regular coffee. Patch them through. And maybe turn down the plant's music just a bit. We want to make a good first impression. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face, Station Administrator Korakth, looking exactly as Jack remembered him, down to the perpetually worried expression that made him resemble an anxious purple giraffe. Human Cooper, Korakth said, his translator struggling to convey both authority and confusion simultaneously. You survived. Of course I survived, Jack replied cheerfully, taking a sip from his coffee. Though I have to say that was a pretty dramatic way to tender my termination notice. Points for style, minus several million for execution. We received no life sign readings from the station, another official said, their multiple eyes blinking in asynchronous bewilderment. How is this possible? Oh. That Jack waved dismissively. Yeah, the life sign sensors were a bit wonky, so I rerouted them through the entertainment system. They work fine now, though they do occasionally try to sign me up for vacation packages. The officials exchanged glances that suggested they weren't entirely sure this conversation was really happening. We are preparing to dock, Korakth announced. We must assess the damage and begin proper repairs. Oh, about that, Jack interrupted. You might want to use docking Bay 3. Bay 1 is currently being used as a hybrid greenhouse jazz club, and Bay 2, well, let's just say it's having an experimental phase. The docking procedure that followed was a masterclass in alien confusion. The officials' ships were guided in by navigation beacons that played smooth jazz, while the docking clamps engaged with what PETA had started calling unnecessary but stylish flair. When the delegation finally entered the station, their reactions were everything Jack could have hoped for and more. What have you done? Korakth asked, staring at a corridor where gravity operated in gentle waves, creating an effect not unlike walking on a liquid floor. Improvements, Jack said brightly. Here, let me give you the tour. Mind the ferns, they get excited around new people. The tour that followed would later be described in official reports as indescribable. Jack led the increasingly bewildered officials through his modified station, proudly pointing out each innovation. And here's the main power distribution hub, he said, gesturing to a room filled with humming coffee makers. It's 43% more efficient than the original system, produces zero waste, and makes a fantastic cappuccino. You're powering a Class 7 space station. With beverage dispensers, one of the officials asked, their translator struggling to convey the appropriate level of horror. Not just beverage dispensers, Jack corrected. See that whipped cream canister? It's maintaining optimal reactor pressure. And those flavor syrup dispensers? They're regulating power flow better than the original regulators. Want to see my spreadsheets? Spreadsheets, Korakth asked weakly. Oh yes. PETA's been helping me document everything. We have charts, graphs, and even a few interpretive dance recordings to demonstrate the more complex modifications. The graphs, PETA added helpfully, are color-coded and occasionally dispense coffee stains for emphasis. The officials huddled together, speaking rapidly in their native language while occasionally casting worried glances at Jack, who was busy explaining to a junior engineer how he'd taught the waste recycling system to play chess. Finally, Korakth turned back to Jack. Human Cooper, What you have done here is brilliant, revolutionary, a triumph of caffeine-powered engineering. Impossible, corrects finished. These modifications violate at least 3,427 safety regulations. The paperwork alone would take several solar cycles to process. Jack said, pulling out his tablet. But according to subsection 89C of the Emergency Station Preservation Protocols, which I had plenty of time to read while everyone was gone, any measures taken to maintain station functionality during an abandonment scenario are exempt from standard regulatory review. The officials stared at him. What? Jack shrugged. I got bored. Did you know your regulatory documents have some really interesting loopholes? Also, a few good recipes in the appendices, though I'm pretty sure those were filed in the wrong place. Before Karax could respond, one of the junior engineers who had been examining the systems rushed over, waving a data pad excitedly. Sir, they said, these efficiency ratings, they're unprecedented. The station is operating at levels we thought theoretically impossible, and the energy consumption is down 76%. 77%, Jack corrected. The plants helped with that. They're very energy conscious when they're not headbanging. The officials huddled again, this time with an air of desperate resignation. When they finally broke apart, Karks looked like someone who had just discovered that everything they knew about reality was actually an elaborate prank. Human Cooper, he said formally, the Galactic Engineering Oversight Committee finds itself in an unusual position. Your methods are unorthodox, your modifications are unprecedented, and your documentation consists largely of coffee stains and musical notation. I also used some interpretive dance, Jack added helpfully. Yes, quite. However, we cannot argue with the results. The station is not only functional but operating beyond our highest efficiency standards. Therefore, Jack raised an eyebrow expectantly. Therefore, we would like to offer you a new position as Chief Innovation Engineer for the entire sector. Now it was Jack's turn to stare. Really? Under strict supervision, Crux added quickly, and with the understanding that all future modifications will be documented in traditional formats. Can I keep the coffee maker power grid? The officials exchanged glances again. Yes, Karax said finally. But please, no more teaching the waste recycling system to play chess. What about poker? The sound Karkth made suggested he was already regretting this decision. We will discuss details later. For now, we need to begin assessing these modifications for implementation across other stations. Great, Jack said brightly. Should we start with the anti-gravity hot tub or the music-powered life support system? As the officials were led away, looking shell-shocked, PETA's avatar appeared next to Jack. You know, the AI said, I think this might be the beginning of a beautiful revolution in space station engineering. You mean because of the innovative solutions and improved efficiency? No, because I'm fairly certain you've just traumatized the entire Galactic Engineering Oversight Committee into accepting human chaos as a valid engineering principle. Jack grinned, raising his power grid coffee in a toast. Mission accomplished, then. 6 months after the Great Space Divorce, Outpost Delta-9 had become something of a tourist attraction. Engineers from across the galaxy would visit to study what they'd started calling the Cooper methodology, though Jack preferred to call it whatever works. And here, Jack said, leading yet another tour group through the station, is where we installed the first coffee maker power converter. We consider it a historical landmark now. The assembled engineers, representing species from across known space, dutifully took notes as the coffee maker hummed contentedly while simultaneously regulating power flow to 3 decks and brewing a perfect dark roast. But how do you handle the regulatory documentation? One of them asked, their tentacles twitching anxiously. Oh, that's the best part, Jack grinned. PETA, show them the new system. The AI projected a holographic display that looked like a cross between a flowchart, a jazz composition, and an abstract art installation. We call it interpretive engineering documentation, PETA explained. Each modification is recorded through a combination of traditional technical specifications, musical notation, and contemporary dance. The coffee stains are now officially recognized as valid engineering annotations. The Oversight Committee approved this, another engineer asked incredulously. Eventually, Jack said, though I think it helped that I installed that anti-gravity meditation chamber in their main office. Amazing how much more flexible bureaucracy becomes when you're floating in 0G with a perfect cup of coffee. The station had become a showcase of what Jack now called humanized engineering solutions. The plant-based life support system had evolved into a full ecosystem, with different species of modified vegetation handling various atmospheric processing tasks. The heavy metal music had been officially classified as a vital atmospheric enhancement component, though Jack suspected this was mainly because no one could figure out how to turn it off without disrupting the oxygen production. "And here's our latest innovation," Jack said, leading the group into a new section. "We call it the Quantum Coffee Initiative." The room they entered looked like someone had merged a quantum physics lab with a high-end cafe. Complex machinery hummed in harmony with brewing equipment, while holographic displays showed readings that somehow managed to be both scientifically precise and caffeinated. By linking the quantum uncertainty principles with coffee brewing processes, Jack explained, "We've managed to create a power distribution system that's not only incredibly efficient but also produces the perfect cup of coffee for each individual consumer, even if they don't know what they want yet." "But that's impossible," one of the engineers protested. "Technically, yes," PETA chimed in. "But we found that if you don't tell the laws of physics something's impossible, they're generally quite cooperative." As if to demonstrate, a nearby machine whirred to life, producing a cup of something that shifted colors like an aurora borealis and smelled like a sunny day on 3 different planets simultaneously. "We're still working out some of the kinks," Jack admitted as the engineer tentatively accepted the cup. "Yesterday it produced a drink that tasted like the concept of Wednesday. But the power efficiency is up another 23%, so we're counting it as a win." The tour continued through the station, past the waste recycling system, now a grandmaster at both chess and poker, through the gravity-warped corridors where walking had become something of an interpretive art form, and finally to Jack's pride and joy, the new Engineering Innovation Center. "This," he announced, throwing open the doors with a flourish, "is where the magic happens." The center looked like what might happen if a traditional engineering lab had a wild night out with an art studio and a coffee shop. Workstations were arranged in patterns that defied conventional geometry, while holographic displays showed ongoing experiments in what appeared to be 4-dimensional space. In one corner, a group of plants was attending what looked suspiciously like an engineering seminar. "Is that Fern taking notes?" someone asked. "Oh yes," Jack nodded. "They're very dedicated students, though they do tend to headbang during the more exciting calculations." As the tour group moved through the center, examining various ongoing projects including something Jack called the Great Coffee Maker Uprising of 2025, PETA's avatar appeared beside him. "You know," the AI said, "when you first started making these modifications, I thought you were completely insane. And now I know you're completely insane. But I also know that sometimes that's exactly what progress needs." PETA's avatar flickered in what had become its version of a smile. "Though I do have one question." "Just one? You really are changing. Why did you install a karaoke system in the quantum physics lab?" Jack grinned. "Because science is more fun when you can sing about it. Besides, you haven't lived until you've heard a quantum probability equation performed as a power ballad." As if on cue, the station's systems harmonized in what had become their normal operating state, a symphony of machinery, music, and barely contained chaos that somehow produced better results than anyone had thought possible. "You've really changed things around here," PETA observed. "Changed?" Nah. Jack took a sip from his quantum coffee, which today tasted like optimism with a hint of statistical improbability. "I just showed everyone that sometimes the best solution is the one that makes absolutely no sense until it works perfectly." He watched as his latest batch of engineering students, a mix of various species and one particularly gifted philodendron, began work on their final project, teaching the station's maintenance drones to breakdance while they worked. "Besides," he added, "who says engineering can't be fun?" The Galactic Engineering Oversight Committee, approximately 2,347 times in their original regulatory documents, PETA replied. "True. But have you noticed how many of them are taking dance classes now?" As if to prove his point, a notification popped up on a nearby screen, another station requesting permission to implement a Cooper-style modification. This one wanted to know if jazz fusion was an acceptable alternative to heavy metal for their plant-based life support system. "See," Jack said, already drafting a response that included both technical specifications and music theory. "The revolution isn't just about better engineering, it's about making the universe a more interesting place, one impossible solution at a time." And somewhere in the station, a coffee maker powered up, a plant started headbanging, and the laws of physics smiled and looked the other way. After all, that's just how things worked now on Outpost Delta-9, where human engineering had proven that the best solutions were often the ones that no one else would dare to try. And if anyone disagreed, well, they could take it up with the chess-playing waste recycling system. It had gotten quite good at arguing its points.